Hmm. Hmm? Ah, yes, broken through, have we? Established contact, have we? Yes, I am told that we are live, that we are here, and I'm talking and you can hear me. Hello, people of the internet. How is everyone doing? Well, honestly, there's a little time delay between my talking and streaming, so I'll look for your answers later. But thank you for being here. Thank you for devoting some time today to talk to me, to basically be part of my continuity presentation. And as you guys know, I'm all about the continuity. It is my credo, it is my meme, it is my fashion. Ta-da! It is all the things I enjoy, and one of the things I celebrate about My Little Pony. But I realize that I've been making this joke for a while, but I haven't actually done anything about it. I haven't talked about continuity. And that is a criminal shame. That is just wrong. It's wrong, I tell you. So, that's why when I found out about this convention, I put together this panel in a rather short amount of time. But there's a lot more to continuity than I ever thought. And that's important, at least in my eyes. So, let us begin, shall we? But first, we got to set our terms because this is the boring part. I got to go through the definitions. I got to say, what is continuity? Well, usually it's considered uninterrupted, connected, successive, or a union. Basically, it's a line of things. Or, in mathematics, it is the property of being mathematically continuous. It's kind of in the name continue, continuity. Root words are fun. But there's another word that I need to familiarize everyone with, and it's going to come into play very shortly. And that word is gestalt. And if you're like me, if you're a child of the 80s or, well, still keeping up with this fandom, you might be thinking Transformers. You might be thinking of good old Devastator here. 6 robots combining into one. And then, of course, it just continues. Transformers really milked the combiners. And I love it. But what does Gestalt really mean? Something that is made of many parts and yet is somehow more than or different from the combination of its parts. Again, we're rocking the combiner strategy. Get all those robots together and suddenly you have a new identity. And you see this in a lot of shows. Voltron, in Super Sentai / Power Rangers. Zoids made a very brief appearance, but it's more than just robotics. Sometimes it's groups all together. And here's the thing, there's a little story about how I started thinking about this. My friend Sapphire Heartsong, she went to a design class and was wearing my continuity t-shirts. And this class had no idea who I was. So they looked at it and the teacher said, wait, continuity? Isn't that one? That's a law of the Gestalt. And so now, in a completely separate sphere, in a place where no one really talks about My Little Pony, my little OC, this handsome hippogriff, hello, is known as Gestalt. So there you go. I wanted to branch out, but I did not anticipate that. Never anticipate that. But that is one of the laws of the Gestalt combination. It's part of design. Basically, we are visual people and we put things together in our mind. Law of similarity. If you see two things put side by side and you notice the similarities, you put them in a group. Man, I don't even know if I can pronounce this properly. Law of Pregans or the law of good figure. Basically, if things come together in a pleasing way, we tend to see them as a group. Law of proximity. Basically, if you take two items, like so, put them together, you have a group. It's also really good for shipping. And of course, there's the law of continuity, the unbroken line. Law of closure. Basically, you put things within a small space and people will start to see the whole group. You can have a lot of fun with this. Anyone who's been driving by a high school and sees like a sign or a logo just made of cups stuck against the fence. There you go, law of closure. And the law of common region, putting things within a certain space creates a pattern or just a formation that we begin to see. We see the forest and maybe not the trees. Or to put it another way, you just get a bunch of folks together and you have a group, a community, an online community, if you will. So there is the power of continuity, and also it makes for fun designs. I mean, you can go through this image and you can pick out, okay, there's every single pony I can think of, or at least that I could draw. But you also see just the group, this long array of fans cheering on Equestria's number one flyer, and it's good times. But it's also very practical. I'm sorry to bring up our current woes with COVID-19, but this was one of the most effective ways of conveying the idea of social distancing, and it relies very heavily on the law of continuity. To the left, you see matches that are on fire. To the right is an almost completely different group, partly because of similar design, proximity, but you see it as a continual line. If you looked at these, you could say of the individual matches, okay, that one looks a little bit more burnt down the stem. One is more red while it's on fire. The others, the unlit matches, may have their own designs. But you'd step back and you see the big picture. And you see this one figure that stepped out of the way to protect the others. And I think it was very clever in this image to give it human properties, legs and arms, like a person. Therefore, in a way, it breaks Gestalt laws. It's not a part of either group. It's shaped differently. It's in a different space. It's outside the enclosure. It is separate. It is distance. This is a great way to explain what a lot of people are trying to put into practice. And so, in terms of design, continuity can have a tremendous impact. And it could be just a really effective communicator. So, pardon me one sec. I just want to make sure that I am on track. Excellent. So, but it can also be psychological. We like to do things with groups. They say mankind is a social animal. But I think it's also just we operate by groups because the world is so big and it's hard to put it all into perspective. And sometimes it's easier to take all these things and group them up into one mass identity than to try and understand each and every little part. And so Gestalt psychology is sort of the countermeasure to structural psychology. Structural, it's saying I want to understand the individual pieces of an aspect. Gestalt psychology is I want to understand the big picture. And there's always a back and forth. There's always more than one school of thought on any given subject. And it can drive you just a little nuts at times. But again, our minds find a way to process. But yeah, you look at how different things put together to create a different whole. And then you can apply that to people, you can apply that to events, you can apply that to entertainment. The idea of many little things coming together to form a greater whole is present in all things, including storytelling, including an appreciation of the shows we enjoy. Because sometimes you'll say, yeah, that was a really good episode, or, oh, that was an awful episode. I couldn't stand it. Or sometimes it's just meh. You just give a big meh. How dare you, meh. And that, too, is just part of the process. And I'll be honest, being a My Little Pony fan, I've had meh times. I've had some episodes I just really disliked. But I keep coming back because the gestalt, the accumulation, is still there and still enjoyable. And I still love it. Pardon me one sec. But continuity. In terms of storytelling, I've talked about design. That you can have things laid out in a line and people will see a pattern, a sequence, a shape. But you can also see it in a formation of actions. You can have continuity as just a sequential event. Basically, it's like the Grand Galloping Gala. You start with the Ticketmaster. Then you get Suited for Success, and finally the Best Night Ever. 3 episodes all around what I would call a current theme. I hesitate for arc because to me, arc implies a rising tension with a climax and a resolution. You don't feel a tension building up to the Grand Galloping Gala, the reveal of the box and its keys. You might not feel a rising tension as the School of Friendship. You might not feel a rising tension right away, even though you knew Cozy Glow was up to something. She's way too polite, to be honest. And so that can be just a series of events. But there's, like I say, no rising tension. It's just things happening one by one. What's more fun in these episodes, what makes them stand out alone and then make the theme of the Grand Galloping Gala more fun, is that one, Ticketmaster. I think that did a better job of introducing these characters than even the season premiere. the series premiere. Because you get to see their individual dreams, their fallibilities. You get to see them as more characters now that the adventure is done. Suited for success? I'll tell you true, I didn't think I'd like Rarity until this episode. And by the end, I was rooting for her, and I just thought it was a lot of fun. And then you all see it blow up with the best night ever. And I remember at the time, there were a lot of harsher criticisms of the best night ever. We thought, wait, all that for this? Well, yeah, like I say, this was a theme, not necessarily an arc. It was meant to be just fun. And we're all about the fun. But continuity is more than just sequential events. Sometimes it's thematic. My favorite example being Charlie Brown. And that terrible joke, I laugh at it, but I also feel bad for him, where Lucy takes the football and he never gets to kick it. And I did just a little reading up on this, how it started, why it keeps going. And funny thing is, this became an annual event. Charlie Brown would try to kick that football every year, and every year something would go wrong. And funny enough, one year in this comic, he basically says, "She's got to be kidding. She must think I'm really dumb." And while Lucy wants him to try and kick the ball, he says, "I have news for you. Never again. Forget it." He says, "Never." And she's like, "No, wait, come back. I haven't abused you enough." He just says, "I'm glad you're the only person in the world who thinks I'm dumb enough to fall for that trick again." Well, with friends like this. So it's funny, it's consistent, but here's the thing. You don't have to see all the others to really appreciate this joke. It stands on its own. But when you look at these events through time, it begins to take on a greater meaning. It is a theme. It is a classic. We're still referencing it in modern continuity, modern culture ourselves, modern continuity. And so that says something. Even in a slice of life, Peanuts is not meant to be a long thematic story. It's just checking in with fun characters and seeing how they're doing. And unfortunately for Charlie Brown, it's not always well. But it stays there. Continuity is present in all things, including characterization. In fact, that's a big part of what makes a good story. Even if you're not going for the big picture, can you stay on track with the characters? Because sometimes continuity is great for character flaws. And I've got 3 examples here. First off, on the left, we have Fluttershy. And I do love Fluttershy. She is my favorite pony. But we've seen plenty of flaws where she's quiet, demure, difficulty asserting herself. And one of the big complaints that people had throughout the run of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic is that it seemed to be relapsing, that a character would learn a lesson and then you check in a few episodes later and they'd be learning kind of the same lesson in a different scenario. I didn't have a problem with that because while it's always frustrating to see a little backslide, people are like that. And the flaw we think we see may be just a reflection of a deeper flaw. So with Fluttershy, yes, she has confidence issues. And over the course of the show, we learned where some of that stemmed from, including growing up in a very demanding culture amongst other Pegasi and being a weak flyer. So that made sense. That built into her character over time. And we also see her integrate changes and rise above her flaw. She'll always be a little bit on the timid side, quiet, but she's learning to stand up for herself. Now, Rarity. I know a lot of folks will say, oh, her flaw is being material or very shallow. And I do think materialism comes into it, but there's also a flaw that we saw manifest in different ways that wasn't so overt. Think about in Inspiration Manifestation, when she makes a puppet stage, and it looks good, but it's not a great utility. The puppeteer can't use it. Completely unusable. Then in this screenshot, It Ain't Easy Being Breezy's, she has this really bright sequin jacket, giving me a run for my money. And underneath that, she has an even brighter dress that is so glaring you can't even see it. It blinds everyone around her. And let's see here. The Scaremaster, when she wears a mermaid costume and is trying to run in it. And she even admits this is not meant for running. Now, think about that for a minute. You're going to a haunted maze, a corn maze. And you're going to be running, but she's wearing this somewhat blocking costume. Rarity has this consistent continuity of a character flaw. She favors form over function and often forgets about to integrate function to her detriment. I think one could argue that her enjoyment of relationships, her crushes on Blue Blood and later Trenderhooves. No, I'm flubbing his name, but you guys know who I'm talking about. She wants to have this fantasy. It's this great form, but then she's not really ready for reality or the function that comes with it. And then there's Twilight. And I know this is an odd screenshot to use for Twilight, because one, it serves multiple continuity features. This is from the movie where she's singing about the stress of being a princess. It's more than just a crown. It's a promise to bring others together and not let any pony down. Well, I love this scene. For visual continuity, we have Twinkle Shine, Minuet, and Moon Dancer. I had to do a double take. I didn't realize this when I first watched the movie. But there they are. Moon Dancer's not wearing her trademark sweater. But there they are, all together, a visual callback to the show and episodes we enjoyed. And, I I joked about this a lot with my review. But there was so much continuity, taking just this little mention from the very first episode and revisiting it several seasons later. And it was one of the best episodes in the show, in my opinion. But Twilight has this flaw, and it manifests with freaking out in Lesson 0 over getting the letter to Celestia, right down to almost cheating within the rules during a trivia contest to win 3 times in a row. And in between, I'm the princess of friendship. I should be the perfect friend, as she thought, which was her motivation for reconnecting with Moondancer and the others. Twilight has this character flaw of linking her sense of self, her self-worth, to titles and obligations. She has a hard time accepting herself as herself. And instead, that leads her down the wrong path. A lot of people in the movie talked about the movie. They were upset at her Grand Theft Pearl, that it seemed very out of character. I'd argue it was a very extreme moment for her, because her thinking, I'm the last princess, I have to fix this, pushed her further than her usual self would be willing to go. Desperation brings out different sides of people, and that makes, in my eyes, more diverse. But then, one of the hard things, though, is that when you're only looking at a sequential number of events, it can be really easy to instantly dislike characters. I think one of the harder examples is Pinkie Pie. And I want to say, don't worry, Pinkie fans, I shall champion her as well. But let's be honest, there have been times, such as in Luna Eclipsed or Philly Vanilli, where the sensitivity and feelings of others didn't seem to be on her radar. In fact, she was often there to make things worse. And that's hard to see. You never want to see a character be the font of all misery unless they are the intentional villain. Then you can love to hate them. But with Luna, she's trying to connect with others, and here comes Pinkie, stirring everyone into trouble. And in fairness, Pinkie didn't know she was having this impact. She was trying to stir up scared fun for the group, for everyone to enjoy this holiday. But she unintentionally sabotaged Luna's efforts. Now, more overt is Philly Vanilli, where she's literally climbing up walls like the possessed. El Diablo, Pinkie. And then she's literally making Fluttershy cry. And a lot of people took issue with this episode, including myself, for Pinkie's depiction. But this is what I mean. If you only view things as sequential events, you might say, well, this character had this really bad moment, therefore I don't like this character. Fair enough, but sometimes continuity is more about stepping back and seeing how the character fits in the bigger picture. One thing, when I made a video on Philly Vanilli, some people commented that Pinkie Pie, by explaining, or rather pushing Fluttershy's mental state to her, if no one has suffered stage fright before, if they don't really know how it feels, Pinkie just laid it out bold-faced. It's very overt. And in doing so, she probably helped the audience understand better and maybe empathize with Fluttershy. Now, that explains one time she did it. I'm not sure about the later two. I feel like that was overdoing the joke, so to speak. But it can also be character strengths that when you just step back and look, again, let's use Pinkie Pie. Because while she has her low moments, every character in the show has a low moment, a moment where they can be really unlikable. But then you think back and you're like, oh, actually, when I think about it, she also gets along with everyone. She spread joy. And then, funny enough, one of the best Pinkie Pie moments, she's not even on screen. I think back, and I remember Twilight in Princess Twilight, stressing about her role in the fandom. Sorry, in the fandom, in Equestria. Basically wondering, can I do this? Can I assume this role? Can I really be the princess everyone wants me to be? Again, linking her sense of self to her title and role. And then she gets a letter, opens it, and confetti blows out, along with Pinkie's trademark sound. And it was this great moment because even though Pinkie's not on screen, she's giving her support to her friends. When she's dedicated, and this is the continuity of the character, when she's dedicated to others, it really shines through. She puts so much energy into it. And so because I can look back and say, hey, yes, there are these moments where a character wasn't so great, and honestly, sometimes that's by intent. Imagine an episode where the ponies were perfect and never had any flaws. How boring. But throughout the greater course, I think there's still more positive than negative, which is how I can celebrate this character. And that's even more true, I think, for Applejack. I mean, when she saves Pinkie from going off a cliff with her shutters, when she is the voice of reason to Rarity and coaches her through a sisterhood relationship, and then later, as she's trying to help Yona integrate with pony culture to be part of the Pony Cotillion. That's a great generosity of spirit. That's a great respect for others. That's being a wonderful helper. The funny thing is, it's kind of hard to say why Applejack is a great character if you point to her episodes where she's the central focus, because often they're trying to present her as being very unreasonable. Applejack is a character who works best with, one, someone to play off of, a foil at times, and two, often shows her best within the group, sometimes helping be that anchor of sanity and centeredness, while everyone else can veer off and be more eccentric. And that's the thing. When you celebrate a continuity of character, sometimes it's not pointing at the central episodes, it's pointing at their continual role, this symphony weaving through the entire story. And in that way, it's a lot more fun. Now, when I was working on this, I realized something. I realized that one of the critiques I've seen in folks in online forums and comment sections and videos is that a lot of folks felt that the story started to go downhill in later seasons. I don't actually agree with that, but I did wonder about what's giving this impression. And it hit me when I was getting that screenshot from She's All Yak. We have had a lot of episodes that expanded Equestria. We had a lot of sequential events that had them revisiting locations or events, but there was less opportunity for those little character moments for someone to add support. The main six were selling much more compartmentalized into episodes. And so Applejack couldn't necessarily help out or be the voice of reason when it was an episode where two characters go outside of Ponyville. She doesn't have a role. And so we started to miss those little beats of character continuity because the focus was now on a much bigger setting. So if that's the critique, then I understand and can agree more. I don't know if I'd call it a degradation of story, but it was definitely a shift, and you miss sort of those older beats. But here's the funny thing. I mean, here I am. I'm talking about continuity in the sense of graphic design or visuals and story. But those are all come down to human perception. And continuity can have a role in our study of history as well. And this is hotly debated. Just as there's the Gestalt psychology and the structural psychology, there are also opinions on continuity in history. And is there a point in looking for themes or ongoing stories in history? So I'm going to label this by two schools of thought. There's the continuity of history and discontinuity. Now, the discontinuity group, these folks looking through history, would basically that life is sequential. Nothing really ends. You can't just say, okay, this is where it stopped, the end. I know our history classes like to add a hard end to a sequence of events. This revolution went on from this year to this year. And, well, then did it just stop? Did someone hit a light switch and say, nope, we're done? See ya? No. Truth is, things carry forward. But the continuity group says that we go through life phases. And one of the more blunt arguments being people have birth, a middle age, and an end. You may not see it at the time, but it is present. It is just something that you can measure, especially in hindsight, especially in the continuity history viewpoint. Much like in fiction, you can't see the phases as you're living them because, there's this fog around us. There's this event. I mean, look at us right now. We're not sure of how things are going to unfold tomorrow. I don't know how the rest of the day is going to go for me. I know I'll be here later tonight talking to the IDW staff, but, the day can go any myriad of ways. But tonight, when I'm about to go to bed, I'll be able to look back and sort of weave a story of, hey, I woke up, I did several things, including this podcast or this live stream, and then here I am getting ready for bed at the end of the day. And the truth is, yes, life is sequential, but one ending is another beginning, is their chief argument. Now, this is interesting because the discontinuity group argues that a narrative is inherently dishonest. It's artificial. When you try to impose this perception of continuity, you try to do what we do every day. You look at something and you see a pattern. Well, it's very possible that, that pattern was not meant to be. That's something we're imposing. I'm looking right now at a stack of plates. I see a stack, but the plates themselves are just occupying space. So maybe that's my mind playing tricks on me. So a narrative of history, some would argue, is dishonest because you're trying to impose a structure that isn't there. You're creating something new rather than bringing together what really existed. Now, the continuity historians, they fire back saying, no, come on. This is, again, we are looking at things from hindsight. Like a narrator of a story, there is three relations. There's the narrator telling the story, there's the audience receiving the story, and there are the characters living the story. Adapt that to history. There is a historian who is looking back at these events and expressing perhaps a common theme. We are looking through people's lives because they didn't know at the time. They did not know what was going on, what was going to happen. And then there's the modern day audience listening to this historian, listening to what they have to say about events and people and maybe a theme throughout history. And they'll say, yeah, this is life. We are looking through life and seeing these unfolding threads. We are seeing the dynamic of communities involved. We're not creating something artificial. If anything, we're discovering something very real that is shared between past, present, and future. So there's a great passion in that. I just realized that there's this weird cloud app signal going on my screen. I hope you all don't see it. Okay, good. But anyway, so there's this great argument going. And then it comes down to history is about social structures, not individuals. You tell a story, usually you're focusing on one person. My Little Pony, for example, is the story of Twilight Sparkle. And yes, her friends are very key players, but she was our introduction. We follow her through a lot of it. One of the fan critiques is that she seemed to drop off the map quite a bit in later seasons. But then you're like, well, hang on. Isn't her story also part of Equestria's story? As we learn more about it, as she discovers its history and some of its secrets and builds a new one. Basically, history, we focus on individuals. You have Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, great artists, Leonardo da Vinci, all these people who contribute, but they contribute to the social structure. they are talked about in history books because they helped build the societies and structures and institutions we know. And that meaning can change. So the individual narrative, talking about one person's journey, can translate into the social. You can look at the beginning, middle, and end. And again, it's kind of hard to understand an ending. Consider for a moment the Roman Empire. People love to compare modern countries to the rise and fall of Rome. But I have to wonder, as the Romans were living out the decline of their empire, was there ever a day where they just said, okay, the Roman Empire's done, bye? I think it was more gradual. You never really see a beginning, a middle, or an end until they're well in the rear view mirror. And as a result, again, that's part of the history. And why the discontinuity people say, no, it's sequential. We're focused in the here and now. And the continuity historians are like, no, we are here now looking at what's come before and trying to figure out what's to come. And so we are never just fixed in one moment. And yes, I tend to fall on the side of the continuity historians, partly because I do see us learning from the past. There is this saying that history is the lab in which we experiment, and that's how we carry those forward. We're going to be studying our history again and again and comparing it to modern context to say, this is what might happen. This is what has happened before. This is what may happen again. That only works if you accept a thematic continuity through time. You see that these situations can run in circles. And as the old saying goes, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. One of the funnier moments from just recent time, this week a local official had to retract a statement that medical marijuana and liquor stores were not essential businesses and should be closed down. People got very mad. And a friend of mine and I both joked, that didn't work for prohibition. Why should it work here? Again, prohibition is a very different scenario, but we're looking at this continual theme of events and applying it to the modern context. Because, one, it helps give perspective. We like to see patterns, and perhaps patterns do exist. And also, it's a way to anticipate and add context. And I think that is, again, why I tend to support thematic continuity history. But I understand also that people are wary of being deceived, because let's be honest, who's telling the story is sometimes just as important as the story itself. Even folks who support the continuity history idea are wary of autobiographies. Because in an autobiography, it's not by no means an impartial party. And then, even if you go down the line a couple of years and a historian's looking at it, they might have an agenda. They might want to say this about history and omit certain parts. They can be factually correct, get the canonical sequence of events right, but it's very easy to lie to people using facts. You can overemphasize one fact, or you can omit another. You can present a skewed image using just the facts. And so, while I support continuity in history, I also say be aware of who's telling the story. Let's look to fiction again, because, history is... There's a saying I'd like to modify. History is written by the winners and questioned by their successors. And so if you were to write the history of Equestria and you got to Celestia and Luna and Nightmare Moon, ooh, where do you fall on that? If you asked Luna/Nightmare Moon, depending on whom, they probably would tell a story that's geared towards their sympathy, talking about how they were ignored or wrong. Flip that, Celestia might also, in a moment of pride, try to justify herself offering an autobiography, or she might be so guilt-ridden that she emphasizes her mistakes, that she says, I screwed up so bad, this is all my fault, when really that might be taking on too much responsibility for what went wrong. And so that plays. As a historian, you could talk about this sequence of events in several ways. How it laid the groundwork for Twilight Sparkle. You could talk about how it showed inherent flaws in Equestria and the pony philosophy was not so absolute or perfect. You could show that it was the fallible side of Celestia, or it's the side of her that was so dedicated to protecting her homeland, she'd even banish her own sister because it had to happen. Again, you can present this a lot of ways. And that's something I really appreciate about history, and sadly, something I've rarely gotten to experience. I won't lie. History was my least favorite class in school. And oftentimes it's because it was without continuity. It was just dates and figures lined up. We never really got to understand why this was important, what this meant to us in the moment. It was interesting, but not relevant. And I think a really good history teacher will appreciate that and convey it to their students to say, what you're seeing then can happen right now. The setting's different, but it can repeat. And again, that's because we look for continuity. And I will end with one quote from a history teacher that I did find very relevant, and perhaps maybe offered my first glimpse into why this is relevant. People of the past, we like to look and say, "Oh, well, this was meant to happen, but I have free choice. I can decide my future." And the truth is, people in history thought the same thing. It's by looking at how things unfolded, looking at phases, and understanding the sequence, the line of events, and also the themes running through it, that we begin to better understand ourselves, our history, and even our own entertainment and minds. And that is part of why I love continuity. It's flashy. So I'm sure you all needed that image. Now, let's see if I can do this in a digital format, because I'd love to take some questions and answers. On the Discord server, let's take a look-see. There is a main stage chat room. I'm just scrolling down here. Main stage. There's actually quite a many chats. So, main stage questions. And I see 2. So this channel is for... So, on the Discord server, there is main stage question. This is where you can type in a question, and I will do my best to answer. What would you say is the fandom? This is from Patrick Roberry. I apologize if I mispronounced that. But what would you say is the fandom's continuity within the show? Well, the funny thing is the fandom, I think, has had a very real influence on the continuity of background characters. We saw all these background characters, and we started coming up with ideas for them, imparting names and identities and roles. And gradually over time, you could see that the show writers were at least aware, and they started integrating them, culminating, I think, in the 100th episode special, where we had all these formerly background characters now getting a chance to be center stage. And in time now, with this awareness that background characters had meaning, had an importance to the fandom, I mean, very tail end of the show, the Big Mac question, we get to see Lyra and Bon Bon propose to one another, something the fandom had been talking about and envisioning in creative work all this time. And the show actually, as sort of acknowledgement of its fans, said, yeah, here. I mean, okay, it's in the background. It can be a blink and you miss it, but it's there. How can we tell if we are facing continuity in our lives? Asks Ben Solo MLP. Well, truth be told, you face continuity in your lives every time someone asks, how are you doing? If I say, hey, how are you doing? You might give the very social, yeah, I'm okay. I'm doing fine. Or you might admit, oh, I had this really hard day where there was a lot of demand at work. Traffic was awful. I missed a gathering. But basically, folks, when we look, even at the end of our day, we look at the continuity. We weave a story for ourselves, and in doing so, we almost without thinking about it, we're not always conscious about how we weave a story together based on our own lives. What episode? Starlight for Princess asks, which episode would you say is the best to showcase the strengths of the show's continuity? That's a good question, because there's a lot of it. I mean, especially in later seasons, you saw a lot of reintegration of locations and characters. Like I say, there was less of an opportunity for less of an opportunity to see characters offering little moments to shine, like Applejack helping diffuse a tense situation or Pinky offering a joke. But you did get to see the larger world. I would argue that amending fences. Oh, sorry, it is just amending fences. Yeah. That's probably the strongest continuity because, one, it utilized an element from the very first episode that was forgotten. No, I don't think anyone really worried about that. It even explained the presence. Like, they brought up Lyra, mentioned how Lemon Hearts, Twinkle Shine, and Minuet were always in Ponyville visiting. So they acknowledged why they were there on screen, even if they live on Canterlot. And it just built on Twilight. It also, and this is important, was a big part of setting the future for her. Case in point, we go back to MLP the movie. She's singing about it is a promise to bring ponies together. And there we see 3 ponies she helped bring together. It was actually setting the stage for the movie in an important way. Or at least in a way where you can look back and say, hey, I see this connection. I totally get if people say you're seeing things where they aren't there. That in my mind, I'm connecting events and finding a continuity that wasn't even intended. I don't think they had amending fences in mind when they wrote episode 1. But that's part of the power of storytelling and being a narrator. You can forge connections to help see a thematic idea. Let's see here. Laser Extreme Dude YT, YouTube, has a question of how I joined the fan base. I appreciate that, but I'm going to hold off on that because I want to tackle continuity. As we're wrapping up, I'll reflect on my own personal story. Is Audible with lots of exclamation marks asks, is there a significant continuity between the show and real life that you really keep to heart? Ooh, there's a good question. Yes, that no one fixes themselves in one event. Basically, like I said, there's a critique that the ponies learn and relearn all the time. And unfortunately, that's true to life. People make mistakes, the same mistake in different situations. And so part of it is, one, accepting and giving yourself permission to make those mistakes. And in time saying, okay, as long as I know the person is actively working to improve, or perhaps this is a flaw that's so, it's non-destructive and so I can accept it, even have fun with it. Let's see here. Coal Dust states that we've seen examples of continuity contradiction in MLP, where an event in one episode contradicts an earlier one. Are there any examples where you can think where this worked out well for the benefit of the story? And it's true, yes. One of the problems with having lots of writers and lots of events and a changing staff is that it's easy to get facts wrong. You can binge My Little Pony and try to write down every aspect, but you'll forget something. But there are times where I feel like a continuity contradiction can work to benefit. Key point is Granny Smith. Early episodes, her one theme was, I'm old and I have a bad hip. And that was it. In doing a review of Leap of Faith with Mage, Lethal Aurora Mage, she pointed out that Granny back then was a very different character. And I thought about that for a while. I was like, I like the current Granny Smith more. I like that she's more of a firecracker and active. And yes, she still has jokes about her age. But I think she's been a lot more fun than if they just kept her as, I'm old and I have a bad hip. Let's see here. Argot Alaphius. What events in pony history or regions outside of Equestria would you like to see in the Season 10 comics? And all right, I learned this week about Diamond Comics and IDW is putting things on pause. Honestly, I am most excited for the continuity of Zakura. Whenever we get the Season 10 phase of comics, the first 2-part story is going to be Zakura returning to her homeland with a group of friends. And we're going to get to learn her backstory. I'm fascinated because here is a character who has moved away from her home, which suggests that she wanted to get away from something. but she feels distant from the current culture, that she prefers to live outside of Equestria. She's not comfortable in their rather controlled environment. She likes the wildness and unpredictableness of the Everfree forest. So what does that mean? What are we going to learn about her history? And then I suppose there's one question I've had since we learned about Grogar, the first emperor of Equestria. We know that the three tribe leaders started Equestria. So if Grogar's the first emperor, I assume he deposed them for a time. And maybe that's why they weren't in charge when Celestia took stewardship. That would be interesting to explore in history, but I have no idea if they're going to tackle it. Pardon me as I rehydrate. Yes, wash your hands, hail, hydrate, even at an online convention. Twinny, what did you think of the mix of continuity and slice of life stories in Friendship is Magic? Well, like I say, even in slice of life, continuity is present, especially in consistency of character. Continuity demonstrates effort, and that's one of the things I celebrate about this show. They could have characters just doing something, being really happy and fun one episode, really cranky and distant the next. But no, they kept a consistency of character and how they would react. Oftentimes in stories, writers will say, I'm not really writing what the characters say, I'm transcribing it. Because you can put two characters in a room and let them go in your head and put that on page. It's amazing how lifelike that can be. Feather Data asks, do you like toast? Whole wheat, yes. Eggnog Dude. Who is best pony and why is it Twilight? That's a funny way of saying Fluttershy. The best pony is the one that brings you the most joy. Let's see. What do you think about deconstruction? Asks Gibbous Wearing Pony. I don't know what a gibbous is. Deconstruction can be breaking down an idea or a presentation to reveal something, to offer a new, unique perspective. One anime I've been very aware of is Madoka Magica. It is a very dark anime because it takes the themes of the Magical Girl show. You have a cute little sidekick, monsters to fight, the girls transform into these costumes, and you think, oh, this sounds great, but honestly, in Madoka Magica, you're making a deal with what seems like an eldritch beast. You are putting your life on the line, and all the cutesy costumes aren't going to save you from some truly horrible events. That's a deconstruction, and it makes you think, wow, there's a whole other facet to this story I never considered. And yet, now when I look at things, it's like, yeah, when I think about it, if a talking cat with a crescent appeared before me and said, you're the next chosen one, I was like, what are you? Should I trust this thing? Let's see here. M. Ditsy Doo, what piece of lore from early seasons do you think wasn't given enough love? Cadence and Shining Armor. Where was Cadence during the events of the opener? I understand that she wasn't introduced to the show, technically didn't exist in the show yet. But one of my complaints about A Candlelight Wedding is that it tried to get me to like them very quickly, but I felt like I hadn't been given enough time to have that continuity of character, to have those moments of celebration, to really root for them. And so I would really love to know more about them and their history. Again, I looked at the IDW comics. Nay Anything, the two-part about their courtship, was a really fun way to get to like the characters better. Let's see here. John Lemon asked my favorite convention to attend. Oh, I can't answer that because I have fun at every convention. The continuity of my life in that case is that I get to see more people. I get to push my own boundaries and test my limits. I mean, I try to be confident and assertive, but there's always a part of me that's afraid to start a new adventure. So I can't quote a favorite. I can just say that I enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing this online convention. What do you think of the continuity of fans or fandom is after the end of the show, or at least this generation? Asks Zephyr. I think we'll keep it going. That creativity does not have an off switch. And there's no one is going to say, okay, the show's over, turn in your fandom and your creativity in the provided wastebasket. No. People are going to keep creating stories. They're going to keep going forward. And, you know, one of the things I liked about the end of the very final episode is that while the book closed, the characters were still living. We had an ending, the completion of Twilight's journey as she became the ruler of Equestria and became Celestia's peer in all respects. But we also witnessed the start of new stories, and I think fans can continue that. Mr. Someone. I like the wordplay on that. What is your favorite example of continuity in the show, movies, comics, etc.? Ooh, that's a hard one. I'm trying to remember. See, for a long time, as a child of the 80s, most of the shows I watched were episodic. They were, you had an episode and it was freestanding. Maybe a two-parter. It was very, very rare for anything to come through. Very rare for anything to come through and be a continuing story or to call back. Then I discovered anime. And I think, honestly, I think Sailor Moon was one of the first introductions I had to really strong continuity as I knew her Serena, later more popularly Usagi. She grew from this whiny coward into a quirky but determined heroine. And that was a fun journey to see. And let's see, I've only got about 3 minutes. And so I'm very sorry to all the folks. I will do my best to copy these questions and maybe answer some on Twitter, as I think this is pretty fun. But I did want to honor my promise of how I got into the fandom. And again, looking back, I can see a beginning, a middle. I'm not at the end yet, but at some point, everyone graduates, moves on, but I'm not at the end yet. But I do remember that when I started, I heard through word of mouth, through popular shows like Red vs. Blue, Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged, Little Formers. Everyone was talking about My Little Pony. I was like, wait, isn't that what I didn't watch because Transformers and G.I. Joe was on? And I was in a job where you didn't see people at their best. And I saw on that guy with the glasses, Chad Rocco, did a retrospective of My Little Pony and the series premiere for Gen 4. And I was intrigued. So I watched over the next several days. I watched a bunch of episodes, and it was fun. I grew to enjoy it. But then I started looking at Fandom Works, and I saw all these episodes, all these creative works, all these beautiful drawings, these funny comics, and I was really getting swept up in the creativity. And I do know a lightning bolt moment where I realized that this had crept up on me. It was funny enough, coming up on my birthday, and I saw an art piece by Harwick called One Last Parade, which features an adult Spike, fully grown dragon, giving an elderly Twilight a ride on his back through Ponyville with all these ponies arrayed. Celestia is next to her watching. You can tell this is the end of her life. She is in her Twilight years. And it hit me. I felt kind of sad. I mean, I realized that this was sort of an inevitable outcome, not knowing where the series was going to go at the time. But also, it was my birthday, so perhaps the topic of getting older really resonated with me. But I thought to myself, hey, why do I care so much about this fictional character unless she's had an impact? And I looked back and I saw the continuity of how this story influenced me and drew my attention and my enthusiasm, and why I suddenly cared so much about this. And that's when I realized, yeah, I'm a fan of this show. And I can tell, and looking back now, when people ask, how are you doing? I can weave this great story about how I've met wonderful people. I've had positive and negative experiences, and I've grown as a result. And I'm pleased and proud to be a part of this and to share time with all of you. With that, I'm out of time and must make room for the next stage. I will do my best to answer some more questions via social media. And I hope you all have a wonderful time with this convention. I will see you later tonight as I'm part of the IDW panel. Have a good one.